Ladies and gentlemen, we are about to begin our session titled Voices Older and Younger, Poetry in English. Kindly take your seats and either switch off your mobile phones or put them on silence mode. The participants of this session are Salman Tarik Kureshi, Ilona Yusuf, Shireen Haroun, Bilal Hamid, and Moeen Faruqi. This session is being moderated by Shahnaz Ahsanuddin.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm. I'm surrounded by 6 poets, so I'm feeling a little intimidated. And I've been reading their verses, and I must say I'm really impressed with what is happening to poetry written in English in Pakistan. We tend to think that it will be just a small audience, and at the moment it is a small audience, but I think that these poems will reach out to many people. Maybe we should start by thinking about what is a poem. Is it just rhythm and rhyme? In that case, Little Miss Muffet sat on a tuffet. Little Miss Muffet sat on a tuffet eating her curds and whey. Is that a poem? When along came a spider and sat down beside her and frightened Miss Muffet away. I think there is a rhyme scheme, there is a rhythm, but I think you will agree with me that it isn't a poem. It's just a jingle. When we talk about poetry, we're talking about a complex intellectual and emotional experience which has to be converted or captured rather in words. Now this involves a struggle on the part of the poet. He doesn't just float into, there might be that aspect as well. We want to discuss this with the actual poets, but the poet indeed has to be something of an artist because he has to choose his words, images. And in fact, we have a gentleman here who is a poet and artist, Mr. Faruqi. He needs skill to manage the effect that he wants to make so that there will be a response in the reader. So when this experience is translated into words, whether it has rhyme and rhythm or not, because even free verse can have a rhythm of ordinary speech or whatever. So that is what we call poetry, mostly stimulated by the imagination of a poet. Now Wordsworth said that poetry was imagination recollected in tranquility, a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings recollected in tranquility. Maybe some of our poets will enlarge on that. In the 20th century, Ezra Pound said, make it new, which meant he was reacting obviously against the trite imitation of the romantics, of the great romantics and so on. So we have to have a source of the experience, an inspiration that the poet goes through. And then he starts to work on that poem which is going to be read, and hopefully that experience will be experienced by the reader himself. So now I don't want to waste too much time because I want the actual poets to speak. Can I first call upon Bilal, Mr. Bilal Hamid. Is it Hamid or Hamid? Hamid. To read some of his poems, and then we'll talk about it. Thank you.
Good morning. This poem is called Russian Revolution. Drinking from a brook, Rasputin murmured with the stream, quiet. Visions of times, peoples, and occurrences pierced him. Temples seeing the edges of paradise. He peeked and saw too much. He sipped the brook of sadness. Love had him. Breath resounding his soul to all words and universe circles, configurations watched him pure. Bowing to wonderment, silent, double rainbows his eyes, tailored, timeless soldier. Afraid in life, tigers in dreams would be the heart of my true nation. Tears in mirrors, reflections. God forgive motherland turned crimson. No word, no worlds, no world war, no chains I need, but how he asked the brook. The brook, the restless brook flowed on its way to the ocean as new waves began. Water crescents, dharmas, nature's dreams seen in the last brooks that spoke to Rasputin. He awoke. The court could not count. Cousins sent legions. The cloud of time began with the pages hundred. Calendar and palaces, whiplashes or washes. Time is a gift, unknown how precious. That's one.
Okay.
Thank you.
Another one?
This poem is called Reincarnation. What are these changes? Inside, yes, but securely outside. An unblinking blackness, tied knots in an infinite string. A reticent infinity, not the aftermath, but the endless explosion itself through eternity. Speaking softly in a skull, whispered by a dying moon that pretends light of its own, in a seedless, treeless garden, whose evident lack of meaning was a mirage to feed the deserters of love. Slaves to frozen power, they hoped they lied when they said, nobody is anybody's anything. They are shod in finery that won't be worn again until the emperor is read again in soft light of a nursery as their eyes get accustomed to the world again.
Bilal, can you tell us how you moved from your initial inspiration to the actual act of writing the poem? Can you tell us something about that?
Allen Ginsberg said that poetry is when someone has a subjective experience and creates an objective reality out of that, that has the necessary capabilities for other people to experience some of his thoughts and images and poetic expression. So I would say there in that poem, which I've called Recollections, I'm thinking about consciousness. I mean, about the duality of consciousness, about how it compares, how it everything is evaluated on the basis of the difference between things. So it made me feel that as soft eyes are born again, that I mean, that the human state is it's shared by all humans. It's common to all. I mean, the emperor, that's an image from a fairy tale. So these things have all been influenced from reading texts as I've grown older. So that's what I would say.
And then, how long did it take you to move from the inspiration to actual writing?
I've been writing poetry since I was 20 years old.
Okay.
And my basis would probably be as a historian in high school that I was towards international politics as well as history. But poetry it lets you jump from one end of the universe to the other if you are able to read something that has the power
or the universal significance that
yeah.
everyone can relate to.
Yeah. And symbols really fascinate me. Symbols, people communicate through symbols, advertising does it. I mean, our entire societies are based on such things. So I think poetry is something that is a part of our tradition in our country. So I pay respect to the fact that I think that it's part of our region as well. So, and I have one more.
Yes, go ahead.
This poem is called Diamond Dust.
Yeah.
Sleeping night, a lonely diamond lay since twilight.
Yeah, you need to talk louder.
Sleeping night, a lonely diamond lay since twilight. Shards, diamond dust scattered like what mattered. Broken beauty, breathe deeply, lovely breathe, sincerely, clearly. Cold dreamt you in mind, dreams diamond. Treasure measured in gold. Cold, the purse carried by buried souls.
Would you like to expand on this a little? Tell us about it.
This is about fragility. About that. I mean, things have value because they're precious, and I think that's what. Because I mean, so much is about money, so much is about these sort of things, but I think that might be a part of things. It's not maybe the most necessary thing, but value is from human life. And, yeah.
Thank you, Bilal. I'll now call upon Farida Faizulla to read some of her poems, and then we can talk about it.
Thank you. Okay, I've chosen two slightly longer and one very short poem. So, my first poem is called To a Lady, written on the 10th of Muharram. Today you will let your hair down your back. Today you will let your chadar fall. Today you will join the circle of women beating breasts, merging their pain in the suffering of those who chose to parch and starve in the desert and give heads instead of hands, in hands demanding compromise. You have often thought, whatever there was to happen has happened. Birth, copulation, death. And what remains but to play back the videotape of time and say at the end of each recaptured scene, it could have been so, it should have been, and then, anyway, it has and would have come to this. You have often wondered, what brought me to this Gibraltar? And with what conviction did I burn all my boats? In derision of what? And why am I here all glittering to glorify my vanquisher? You have often longed to throw an offered plate in a face and smear a smile, to bite till disability fingers used to being gratified, to vomit out each drop of milk and wean a child, as though you have tried, and courage has compensated for such failures. You have never cried. Today you have found that ceremony of expression, where grief is mistaken for pretense and pretense for grief. You are safely stamped a hypocrite. Today, at the end of this morning session, you will pray for a different kind of freedom. Thanks. Thank you.
You have another one.
My next poem is called The Pied Piper, and Bilal just said he is inspired by fairy tales. I am also probably so. Okay? You think the piper did not know they wouldn't pay for freedom from the rats they feared would ultimately seize their babes? Why didn't he demand an advance? Was it simple grant of convenience or experiment in confidence that honor is despite greed? Why did they go back on their word? Was it blatant display of deceit or the time-old tendency of finding prices higher when paid after rather than before the satisfaction of a need? Remember how they stood and saw their children go? Without a flicker of an eye, they didn't dare let out a cry. What froze their vocal cords? Was it? What froze their vocal cords? Was it the shame of an unkept promise or the knowledge that its sanctity was not so trivial after all? Questions for posterity, and one more. You who write this epitaph to the city that sold her innocence, who could you be? Perhaps the mayor's other half? Perhaps the piper's other half? Perhaps the mayor's penitence? Perhaps the boy who limped behind and cursed the foot that saved his life. Thank you.
Really powerful
And my last poem is kind of dedication to all the young people because it reminds me of my younger days. And it's very short. It's called A Fresh Start. Stars are not as distant as they seemed, nor my space in life as small as tight. I have learned to look up, look out, look around. Is it that I have overcome the fear of losing, or that there is nothing more to lose? The question doesn't count. The answer is, I have broken open all windows, all doors. And what might have been intrusion is the act of taking. Thank you.
Wonderful. Can you tell us a little about how you came to write these poems?
About the last one, Fresh Start. Actually, I earlier called it On Recovering from an Illness, because I actually wrote it, I had very bad flu, and suddenly it vanished, and I felt so fresh. Then later on I called it a fresh start, but then I realized it was also about changing, your perception, your attitude. It's not about the outward things changing, it's the things change that inside you that change. So that's one thing. To a lady, the 10th of Muharram was inspired by, of course, as you know, we have majlises in Muharram, and I actually see people, I am also a part of it very often, and that drew me to thinking about what goes on in people's minds, when they are actually taking part in a ritual. So that was one inspiration. And Pied Piper, this myth was always this story was always disturbing. It's one of the disturbing fairy tales. And then I thought about the situation in Karachi, and I think both things came together. So, thank you.
Thank you, Farida. I think your poems are so effective because you engage us in thinking, feeling, and of course the use of your imagination compounds the effect.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was a real privilege to hear your poems. I now call upon Shireen Haroun to read her poem. Are you reading Metamorphoses?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
This is actually one poem divided into 4 parts because I have difficulty writing at length. So I felt it was better. The poems more or less sort of grew out of each other. Anyhow, I'll start. The first poem is called Flight. As birds will abandon a nest that's disturbed, leaving their eggs unhatched, taking no further thought of them, surely they would celebrate a homecoming elsewhere, another tree, but not all leaves are green, a thicker foliage where they might sing unseen. Or perhaps for them it is all flight, the whole sky is theirs, who have deftly learned to bear their weight somehow differently.
That's lovely.
The second of the series is called Butterflies. How did the returning summer find you? In flames, all brilliant color, the way a child might tint you among our geraniums. Though so oddly gauze-like, the merest breath would tip you off a petal. It was a long winter, but the air has gentled. In the sun, the garden seems vivid, greener. Yet you paused over the scarlet bougainvillea on the wall, interrupted your own dance. In that instant, grown pensive, asked yourself, why am I different now? And the third one climbs out of this one. It's called Climber. March's hard-edged shovel lays the root tip, bedded and dampened, but not in this sand soil. It grew out of richer clods, hesitant, then sturdy and vigorous, sprang into leaf. Now this cascade of blossoms has scaled the wall, spread itself out. A breeze ruffles the scarlet heads, murmuring of things they knew. Calm in petals, the sun is not your friend, merely a transition. Crimson to purple, diffusing to white. The secateurs, a second, sharper knife, fall, then floating drift, clear, water almost. And the last poem in the section is called Reflections. In the cool of evening, the walk across damp grass to the unswept surface of ponds, where at dawn a bird slaked its thirst beneath the flash of brilliant wings. The blossom floats, blanched out. Sorry, I have a cough. Unrecognized. The pool is a collector. Dry leaves, fretted silhouettes of trees, twigs. It takes them all, merely repeating its own labials. But as the light dims and blurs, their shapes dissipate till only the water itself is visible, silver, disclosing exactly what it sees. And in the gathering twilight, all it perceives is just sky.
You were obviously inspired by nature. And how did you, was this an experience of repeated experiences, or was it?
Well, actually, they're philosophical poems. It's a transition between life and death, right. And the nature imagery are really symbols which reflect that. Yeah. The water, the sky, the end. Really, that is basically what the poems are about. But I suppose, yes, it's a lot of my poems have a great deal of nature imagery in them, which is rather strange because I'm generally not a person who likes going out in nature. In fact, I loathe the outdoors. But that's a strange paradox in my work.
Maybe you've read about nature instead of observing it yourself. You got that it exists.
So you've got that very graphic poem.
Yes.
Earthworm.
Sorry?
The poem Earthworm.
Yes, yes.
I mean, it's like you've observed it so closely.
Well, I actually did, because it rained one day and these wretched earthworms came in through the door. But I suppose I do live closely with nature. We have a large garden, and my husband we have tremendous, and I have huge amounts of pets. Our house is like a zoo. So yes, anyone who's been to my house. So I suppose in some way there is this connection with nature, and perhaps it's not just what I've read about. Perhaps I actually somewhere along the way do have a feeling for nature and for animals. I mean, perhaps, and it's reflected in the work.
Do you remember the last few lines of Earthworm? Because those are the most...
Sorry?
The last few lines of Earthworm. Can you recite those? Because those they kind of encapsulate the whole poem. He who bites the root, or something like that. It's about how it turns over the soil, and it never sees the flower, right?
Yes. That's right. I don't think I have it with me, Ilona, unfortunately. Okay. I don't think it was published. It wasn't. That's a rather radical poem, I'm afraid. So I don't think it was published in this anthology.
Okay.
But I have read it out before.
The reason I asked was because that's got a very philosophical kind of, like you said, these are philosophical, and that is as well.
Yes, it is.
But can you describe your struggle to express these ideas? Give us some idea of how you actually came to pen this poem.
this one in particular,
Or any poem. I mean,
well, the strange thing about poetry is that sometimes it is a struggle. I can write a poem, I can have a wonderful idea and start writing a poem, and it takes me 2 weeks to complete, and at the end of 2 weeks, I think this is bloody awful stuff, excuse my language, and I tear it up and throw it away. I'm sure all poets go through that. And then there's some poems which almost feel as if I've not written them. They float out on the page. And the first poem or two in this series was a struggle. Once the last two poems, particularly the one about the water, the sort of the fourth element in the poem, I almost felt as if I hadn't written the poem, as if the poem had come to me. And many poets often feel this,
So
that they don't write the poem is sent to them.
it's a visionary.
Almost a visionary experience. Yes, it was quite extraordinary, that this one, because I didn't really know how to end the series, and then I just had this, I mean, it just came to me in almost as if someone was whispering in my ear. It was it was almost, I would say, a psychic experience. Very strange.
That's very interesting.
But other poems, yes. Some of my other poems, like Page Bird, I struggle with them. I got up in the middle of the night and thought of 2 lines, and rushed off the middle of the night and written 2 lines down. And it's a struggle. So sometimes they are, and sometimes they aren't. You can't tell. And you also can't tell, strangely enough, sometimes, and I'm sure the other poets here will agree with me, which poems of yours are actually going to be a success and which are not. Because sometimes I think I've written an exceptionally good poem, and then I read it to friends and colleagues, and they say this is crap. And there's some poems which I don't like, and they tell me, my dear, this is brilliant. So I myself sometimes can't make that judgment. Which is why I think it's very essential for poets in general to have a support network and a forum where we can bounce our work off each other.
Right. Thank you. That was very interesting, and it's added to our knowledge of the poetic process, actually. I now invite it's Mr. Moeen Faruqi to read us some of his. You are a poet and a painter.
I'm a painter.
You are a painter.
I'm a poet.
Primarily, you see yourself as a painter. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, this first poem is called Studio. Tame the light, place it beneath the flesh of paint, harness it in garlands around her hair. Subtract the shadows, they speak alone in darkness, veils upon veils. Tame the light and make it grow, it will breathe on her face, scales of iridescence. Rings within crystal rings, igniting windows that frame both sun and stars. Eyes aglow, redness around the ears, a shiver of life on one side of the face, and beyond the skin, a touch, an unsettled awakening. This is a poem I'd like to share with you that I wrote for an artist friend who passed away suddenly a couple of years ago. And it's called Unfinished Works. It's for Usman Ghori. You left us in halves, half of your laughter still ringing in the breeze, half of a heart still beating for reasons unknown. A smile, a touch, a word, all begin to fade from causes left unsaid. The answers are there in your handiwork, the things your hands touched, made, fashioned into desires. answers in the people left incomplete, your spouse, your children, emptied friends, suddenly left as unfinished paintings, works no longer in progress, unframed, unformed sketches. We are part of the wishes you left behind, wishes that waft into emptiness, leaving shells of your creations that touch us now as never before. One last poem. This is just a visual kind of thing. It's called Last Rain. A low moon racing over fences and walls, watching worlds fade and reappear. A house with wings follows the scent of migration. Breeze from a distant sea traverses familiar lanes, speaking at doors of absent friends. On the shelf, a vial of almond oil, a golden lens with new light, filled by a gentle hand. You rub it on your scalp, breathing its smell of leaves. The floor of the house, a chessboard of memories, steps to the secret room, its dank laughter echoing. In the distance, upon a waning blue, arms of trees signal the departure of rain.
Wonderful, but I can see why you say you're a painter first, but you are a poet. You've used a very strong sensory sort of experience to transmit your ideas. Thank you very much. Can you comment a little on what you consider or how you combine emotion, thought, and put it together as a whole?
I don't know, I think I'm just trying to create visual imagery and, I actually don't know what, I mean, I leave it to the whoever's listening to it, or reader to interpret it, or, So it's, for me, making a poem is about making people see and,
yes,
and make the connections themselves and leave it open in a sense.
Okay.
So everybody can have their own interpretation.
Right. Okay. Do you go through a struggle to express yourself in poetry?
In the sense that I try to avoid going there, but yeah, but yeah, after every so often one feels the need to write, or you as you said, you feel some lines have come out and you want to put them down, and you see where they will go, but for very few occasions where I've actually written, like I wrote for that friend of mine, my work is again very visual. It's just painting with words. Really.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what it is. So I hope.
But it has depth of emotion. I think that's where you succeed as a poet. You have to combine, I think you have to combine thought and feeling. You have to, the reader has to be moved. And I found that experience in your poem.
Yeah, I think, like Chiki said also, I mean, for each one poem that sort of seems to come together, there's corpses of so many poems that are just, lying there unburied, which would be all torn up.
That's interesting. So you've written some bits which you didn't actually develop into a full poem.
I did try to, but they were kind of stillborn. So you try to...
In fact,
and you sort of try to revive this poem. You work so hard at it, and you're trying to revive it, but it's dead.
Yes.
Farida, do you go through a similar experience?
Oh, yes. Things keep cooking in my head so many times. I mean, months and months, and then something comes on paper. And it happens.
But I think that when one's poems fail, Moeen, I'm sure Moeen would agree with me, there's this... one is depressed for days because you put so much intensity and so much more passion into it that, and it doesn't work out, it's quite an upsetting experience.
So in fact, what you're saying is that creativity is behind all poetic experiences. I mean, in the same way that a mother-to-be would feel depressed about losing her baby, to carry the metaphor.
Well, yes, in fact, there is a poem by Sylvia Plath called Stillborn.
Yes, yes.
Which is quite a well-known poem about her, and where she compares her dead poems to stillborn fetuses. So it's, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now we will ask Ilona Yusuf, to give us some of her poems. She lives in Islamabad and has come here specially for this festival.
I'll begin with something called the mechanics of hearing. Can you hear me?
No, you'll have to be a little louder, I think. It's on.
All right. This is a poem which is divided into two parts. Somehow, like you said, you can't write long poems, right? So recently I started splitting my poems into parts. This one is called The Mechanics of Hearing. And part one is the mechanics of hearing. Hammer, anvil, stirrup. 3 bones and a membrane sandwiched midway along a concealed tunnel. Minuscule bones working in harmony of sequential movement strike the tympanum. Membrane stretched taut across a hollow body to receive a myriad chromatic inflections. Past the cone of light, in and out, back and forth, to and fro, the little hammer pushes waves past anvil and stirrup, past a forest of fiber swaying liquid in the labyrinth of chamber on spiral chamber, inland sea sounding within a shell, filtering, translating kaleidoscopes of sound, so that amidst cacophony, a single clear note cuts through the air, filling it with pure sound.
Wow, that was impressive.
Part two is called The Mechanics of Silence. And then there is erasure, a willful act, to close the ear to sounds it does not wish to perceive or hear, to rub away voice, to stiffen the amaranthine flexing of this assembly of moving parts, to dull the movement of hammer, anvil, stirrup against the tympanum, that it loses elasticity, that it idles untuned, that it unlearns the shape of sounds, the shape of words, the reading of sound, the exercise of speech, that it rubs away voice, that it ossifies in silence, overwhelmed.
Wonderful.
The next one's more visual. This one is called Lament Number 2. It may be our last April in this house, in this city, here on the veranda with the spiced fragrance of spring fast being overtaken by this warm wave presaging summer's hot wind. The amaryllis lilies are scarlet, erect on their graciously inclining stems, their elegant practiced curve withering in the noonday sun. The mauve of jacarandas turns powdery. You cannot immortalize this moment, conjure up the atmosphere of an otherwise silence. A cuckoo here, the whoop of a coil invisible in the trees, a crow chucking to her babes, the staccato cry of the neighbor's peacock as it rises into the trees. Suddenly, on the rose creeper, I see clusters of white butterflies, and I remember you telling me, in that time of peace, how driving up the mountain early mornings, rising from the road in an undulant wave ahead of your tires, in hundreds and thousands, white clouds billowing, fluttering. These same butterflies, small, plain, turning the roadside hedges white in a lighting.
Wow.
The last one is one of those poems which kind of wrote themselves, and it's called Karakoram Album, Rock Meets Water. And it's, again, divided into many sections, so I'll only read 4. They're all quite short.
So you're not going to read us Swat?
No. I've read it at 2 places, so I...
Well, why should we be deprived? Just because you've read it at 2 places.
That's
Anyway,
my
go
political
ahead.
poem, but I have to ask the audience then. Do you want to? Oh, okay.
No, we have the time.
Would I have time to read these 3 sections, or if not, I just read these 2?
Just those 2, I think.
So I'm going to read you sections 3 and 4 of this. In the cocoon of the Janta's clean control, the proliferation of virtue, the smooth piety of language are an offering to God who has a new name that the people do not know. He is no longer Rabb, no longer Khuda, no longer friend. He is Allah. This name alone, all that is by His will. The bureaucrats cross their right palms over their chests, obsequious. Generals with epaulets, their chests an expanse of metal eyes, raise their right arms across their chests, speak words of grave piety, the sure training of a new tongue. The quiet nation awash with arms while ladies and barons sip tea and shop for jewellery. In the protection of the studded reverence of men with medals round as fish size, khakis starched stiff as board, manicured nails and soft hands that give with generous gesture wads of paper to the holy whose narrowed eyes gleam with zeal, promises of shining arms. Money is a freely given thing. It's party time, and we are silent and gay. Turn the other eye, the blind one, the stories that rise like scum on stagnant water.
Yes, bravo. You used sound, silence, and sense. Would you like to comment on that? In the 3 poems, 3 different poems.
You know, it didn't occur to me that they all kind of related.
So how do you describe your creative process?
Well, you know, when I first started writing poetry, it was just that lines used to come to me, and over a period of time, then sometimes, you know, like you said, everything comes, you know, it comes in one go, and sometimes I would be thinking about something and 2 lines would occur to me in the middle of the night, and like you said, well, I don't rush off in the middle of the night. I have this little, because my husband sleeps very lightly, so I have a little book by my bedside table and a pen, and I kind of reach out, and I know there's going to be scribbled in an odd way, but I just jot it down, because I know that if I wake up in the morning, I'll have forgotten it, most of it, even if I try to memorize it. Sometimes I'm lazy and I don't write it, and I try to memorize it. And sometimes, like you said, I just struggle. So, you know, the Swat poem actually came very quickly, because lots of things were happening. And there's one section in there which talks about the aquifer, and the aquifer is like, you know, when something is beneath the ground, you can't see it, but it's there, and it's huge. And then it kind of envelops you. So that's how the poem began. And the aquifer I was told about when I was in America, and I was on a Native American reservation, and the Native Americans don't like the Americans, obviously. So I was told that this particular reservation had an enormous aquifer, which they were kind of sitting on like a weapon, in a way. I mean, the way the metaphor was used was, or the way it was expressed was, it was like a weapon. And it occurred to me when I came back and all this, you know, was going on, the operation in Swat was about to begin. That's where it began from. The rest kind of wrote itself. The other section that I didn't read is actually the experience of somebody who had to leave Swat. And it's almost verbatim from a friend of mine who worked in Swat.
It sounded very, very authentic, that first part. Yeah. Thank you very much, Ilona. we now call upon Salman Kureshi, who is the senior most poet in this group, to read us some of his works.
Does that mean,
Take it whatever way you like.
does senior most mean oldest?
We can see some signs of it.
Actually, what I'm planning to read is concerns the aging process, perhaps, over time. Called Poem in the New Year.
Yeah.
Unease at evening. Sorry. Unease at evening and last night's clarity of stars heralded this prism shift of morning sunlight. The altered breeze, grown keener, drier, gathers away brine-sodden curtains of sea mist. Ushered at last by ship's horns to our south, winter commences its rearrangements. In this suburban garden, the waxen sheen of magnolia flakes to dullness. Green creepers against brick-red walls blanch in the paler light. Our shadows and those intersecting grow longer, nor disappear at noonday. We resolve this to be a time for alterations, before the unease of ever-deepening twilights becomes a starless tossing in uncharted darkness. But the seaward flowing air now chills too sharply at the bone. Brine encrusts rusted anchors. Tendrils of anemones festoon the rigging, their roots riddling through hull plates, crumbling the masts. Salt stings within the veins. Not trade winds, nor monsoon corridors drive to such shipwrecks. Only the count of too many winters. Rocks by a garden pond, and a single unseasonal dragonfly, patterns of intersecting shadow beneath blades of grass, the last wilting lily. Land anchored, our eyes search leeward of horizons, only for shifts of sunlight, squinted at differently. Voyage enough to stare into the changing winds of another year, into another passage of the seasons.
Wonderful.
Do I have time for this?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, we have 10 minutes, so you can read.
The longish poem. I was not going to read it, but a number of my friends have requested me to read it. So I'll do that. It's called Cottage. And you'll recognize the locale, I'm sure. In this place, clouds wander through an open bedroom window. Streamers of sunlight alternate with their passage. We discover shaded tussocks where mushrooms flourish, secret glens, dine at the small nearby hotel with wooden floors and an old piano and the only telephone in the village. On the slopes across the valley, shadows cast by cloud change and change again in a continuing flux of shade, sunshine, shade on the blue pines, the green larches. Without emphasis, statement, tumbling gravelly certainties into ever-altering, never-repeating patterns. A borrowed cottage in the mountains walks along the dirt roads between the pines, where the mist seems always to linger, clinging to the low shrubs, the feet of trees. or it subsides, or it suddenly pours in between the trunks, dissolving edges, annulling distances, looping together branch, bird, grass, shrub, cottage, insect. As suddenly, the mist is gone. The air becomes drier, sharper. A leaf-scented breeze riffles the hair on the backs of hands, prickles cold in the nostrils. In the not yet twilight, the mist bank's unbroken surface, opalescent in the paling sunlight, fills the space between hills. Breaks in the next instant to reveal scattered lights in the valley below. A spume of pine-scented fog blows into the face, catches in the throat. The night birds are silent, and the birds of morning. There is a rustling in the firs. A dog barks, jolts of sound repeat through the dim loops and swirls. A stirring of birds, splashing of water somewhere. A sudden roaring descends and then retreats to the sound of a lorry laboring up the road below. The mist brings noises and takes them away, tunes the self to its own reality. Within, there is a knitting together of something one had not known. Darkness advances. Is it a tree, or someone out in the early morning, or merely a deeper eddy of vapor? Beg pardon. Dangerous this ground. Steep. Fingers and toes delve in the cold clay. The trunks of trees, almost invisible, spring sideways and curve straight upward. Wait until day for the scented afternoon shade between the pines, the sharpness of air in the lungs. The ground is almost level in this narrow glade between the trees. The steely blue of the sky is seen through the branches. The end of the tree line is near. Cones fall nearby and a bird flutters past, seeking egress from the overhead boughs. The rags of mist still cling to trees. Shreds of vapor creep over the ground like water around the ankles. The trees are all tall here, old. Easy to accept the idea of an entirety amongst these cloud-wrought deceptions, chromatic aberrations of sunlight that fragment and concealed the black rot, the nullity at the core. Not death, the sheet pulled over the head, the flat line on a monitor screen. Not death, but that which carries the coin of death on its dark facets. Applaud then these kaleidoscope moments on the sides of mountains. Celebrate the mists that spin illusions within the swirls, dissolve boundaries. Praise their slow, blurring embrace. There are red berries among the dark leaves of a shrub that are moist and a little gummy to the touch. Squeeze open to the center. Specks of seedlings, the brightness of spilt juices, a momentary pungence on the air. No mysteries.
Thank you. Salman, tell us something about how you managed to write all this. Yes, Nathya Gali, of course. Well, not quite Nathya Gali.
No, actually, it's Dunga, but anyhow, neither here nor that's neither here nor there. Well, how did I write? Okay, if this particular one, Cottage, was very, very slow in gestation, it took me a number of years. In fact, I actually wrote a short story in that locale before I went back to the poem.
Okay.
I started with a poem, then it took another form, then I happened to write a short story based on the same locale,
Okay.
and then I went back to the poem, and it took a long time coming out and a lot of cleaning, polishing, take it apart again, put it together again. went on, I think, over some years. So it's almost impossible. In my work, for whatever it's worth, yes, there's always the visual element, but what I like to reach for is the tactile element also. I should be able to smell, taste, touch the poem.
Right.
And I love music, so I like to get some elements of musical composition into the poem. Those are just the bits and pieces that come together to a very long, slow gestation of a poem. I think
we've got a few minutes. If you'd like to tell us something about the process of creating.
It's I won't call it a painful process, although, yes, not painful really, but it's exacting. I like to craft my stuff. I'm not a believer in momentary inspiration. Yes, on the Wordsworth remark, I would take my time. And if you take the Pound remark you made, make it new. Well, yeah, that's the whole modernist movement, is it? But to me, it's new enough that if I'm saying it and nobody else says it quite the same way, you know, look, there are only 7 or 8 kinds of subject for a poem anyhow. Life, death, love, nature. So that's about it. You know, God. That's about it. It's hard to say, make it new, but it will be new because if I've done it and you did it differently, it's new.
Right.
And having said that, I don't know what else about the process. I said, keep working at it. You don't even know when it's going to finish. You'll always think of something you could have changed.
Okay.
Right? I'm sure.
Right. Thank you, Salman. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you enjoyed our session. I've certainly enjoyed meeting with these people and reading their poems. Thank you.